The restaurant La Lumiere was the kind of place where napkins came folded like works of art and the crystal glasses reflected the soft glow of chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. The mirrored walls, the arrangements of exotic flowers, and the piano playing in the background created such a sophisticated atmosphere that any detail out of place would immediately stand out. And that was exactly how Nathan Reed felt as he pushed open the glass door to the main hall. His simple, slightly wrinkled shirt and worn-out jacket clashed with the impeccable suits of businessmen and the gala dresses of women laughing at their reserved tables. He hesitated for a moment, certain he was in the wrong place. But the phone in his pocket buzzed with the last message from his friend who had convinced him to show up. Table by the window. Woman in red. Don't chicken out, Ryan. He took a deep breath. A blind date. Something he would normally never do. But his friend had insisted so much, assuring him that the woman was different, kind, sincere, that it was worth the risk. Nathan walked through the hall, feeling the curious glances of some customers. When he found the indicated table, near the window overlooking the brightly lit avenue, he saw her, a young woman in a red dress, dark hair falling in elegant waves over her shoulders. She calmly leafed through the menu, oblivious to the chatter around her. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be her? He straightened the sleeve of his jacket, trying to appear less out of place, and approached. "Hi, are you Claire?" he asked, his voice wavering with nervousness. The woman looked up. Her eyes were deep, attentive, as if they could see more than he wanted to reveal. A faint smile curved on her lips. "That depends, are you Nathan?" He nodded, relieved. "Then I suppose I am," she replied, closing the menu. "Have a seat." Nathan pulled out the chair, still feeling like an intruder in that luxurious environment. The waiter appeared immediately, placing a bottle of imported water on the table. Nathan noticed the man's gaze lingered a second longer on his worn jacket, and he almost laughed nervously. "I hope I'm not late," he said, trying to start a conversation. "The traffic was terrible." "You're right on time," Claire replied naturally. There was something in her tone, firm, yet effortless. As if she were used to leading situations. They began to talk about small things, the city's unstable weather, the crowded restaurant, the piano music. But little by little, Nathan realized that Claire had a peculiar way of asking questions. They weren't superficial. She wanted to know about his choices, about how he faced work, about what he believed was important in a relationship. He answered as best as he could, sometimes with humor, sometimes with uncomfortable honesty. But with each response, he realized he was being evaluated. Not in a cold way, but as if she truly wanted to understand who was sitting in front of her. "You said you work in," she asked, leaning slightly forward. "An auto repair shop," Nathan replied, lowering his eyes to the white linen tablecloth. "I own a small business. Nothing fancy, but it's honest." He expected to see disdain, or at least a shadow of disappointment. But Claire only nodded, as if it were an important piece of a larger puzzle. "Interesting," she said. "Mechanics usually know very well the value of things that don't shine on the outside, but hold everything together on the inside." Nathan blinked, surprised by the remark. It didn't sound like a casual comment. The dinner went on, and between timid laughter and curious silences, the mechanic began to relax. There was something magnetic about Claire, the way she looked at him with genuine attention, as if every word mattered. But there was also something odd. She never spoke about herself. When he asked about her profession, family, or hobbies, she would elegantly deflect, turning the question back to him. At first, Nathan thought it was just reserve. But as the evening went on, he began to wonder, who exactly is this woman? The waiter brought the main course, and the mechanic stumbled over the exorbitant prices on the menu. Claire noticed and smiled faintly, as if she had expected exactly that reaction. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Yes, of course," the mechanic replied. "It's just... I've never eaten anything that cost half my rent." Claire laughed, and her eyes sparkled. "Don't worry about that. I'm more interested in your company than in the price of the food. The words sounded sincere, but there was a hidden enigma in them, as if the dinner meant much more than it seemed. And then, in the middle of the conversation, Claire leaned over the table, looking at him with an intensity that made him swallow hard. Nathan, do you believe people reveal who they truly are when they have nothing left to offer? The question hung in the air like a challenge. He didn't know how to answer right away. Before he could say anything, a man in a dark suit discreetly approached, whispered something in Claire's ear, and walked away. Nathan noticed the quick exchange of glances between them. There was respect there. And maybe, authority. Claire turned her gaze back to him, her smile intact, but her eyes carrying a mysterious glimmer. Forgive me, she said softly. It seems our night is about to become more interesting than you imagine. Nathan shivered. For the first time that evening, he had the strange feeling that he wasn't the only one being tested on that date. And you? Have you ever been in a situation where someone wasn't exactly who they seemed to be? Share your experience below, it might inspire others to look beyond appearances. The waiter stepped back after serving the main course, and for a moment the hall returned to its cadence of elegant whispers, clinking silverware, and muffled laughter. Nathan tried to relax, but the feeling of being out of place still weighed heavily on his shoulders. His worn jacket seemed more and more out of place among the tailored suits around him. Claire, however, showed no sign of discomfort. On the contrary, she observed him with calm attention, as if she wanted to decipher every expression that crossed his face. So, Nathan, she said, resting her chin on her hand with a light gesture. What's the hardest decision you've ever had to make? The question caught him off guard. He had expected something like favorite movie or places you'd like to visit, but not such a deep dive right from the start. Hard decision, he repeated, buying time. I think it was when I decided to open my own garage. I had a steady, safe job, but I felt I could take the risk. It wasn't easy, but today, even with difficulties, I know it was worth it. Claire smiled, satisfied with the answer. The courage to take risks. I value that. Nathan stared at her for a few seconds, intrigued. The way she asked questions, it didn't feel like mere curiosity. It was as if she were evaluating him, mentally jotting down points in an invisible notebook. The conversation continued in that tone. Claire didn't say much about herself. She deflected every question about her personal life, turning everything into reflections about him, his values, his worldview, how he dealt with mistakes. The further the dialogue went, the more Nathan felt he was in some kind of interview, not a casual date. When dinner ended, the waiter brought the bill in a small leather folder. Nathan, already embarrassed by the absurd price of the dishes, reached into his pocket. But before he could say anything, Claire sighed softly. Oh, how careless of me, she said, furrowing her brow. I think I left my wallet in the car. She looked at him as if apologizing, but there was something in her eyes that made him suspicious. It didn't feel like genuine forgetfulness. It was almost intentional. Nathan hesitated. The bill wasn't small, and he knew it would tighten his budget for weeks. But leaving a woman embarrassed in front of the waiter? That didn't seem acceptable to him. No problem, he said, forcing a smile. I'll pay. Claire never took her eyes off him as he handed over the card. Her gaze held an intensity hard to decipher, something between interest and silent approval. When the waiter walked away, she leaned forward. You didn't even hesitate. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Most men would complain or make a joke. You simply took care of it. Nathan shrugged. I didn't think there was another option. She smiled in an enigmatic way, as if that answer revealed more about him than he realized himself. Shortly after, a small incident occurred in the dining hall. A young waiter dropped a glass while trying to balance several trays. The crash of shattering glass echoed through the restaurant, and immediately the manager approached, harshly scolding him in a loud voice in front of the customers. Many laughed or shook their heads in disapproval. Nathan felt an uneasiness in his chest. He saw the boy's face flush red, visibly embarrassed. Without thinking much, he raised his voice. "Hey, accidents happen." The manager turned, surprised. "Did you say something, sir?" Nathan kept his tone firm, but respectful. "I just think there was no need to scold him in front of everyone." The boy must already feel mortified. A silence lingered for a few seconds, until the manager, embarrassed, only muttered and told the waiter to clean up the shards. The young man cast a quick look of gratitude at Nathan before disappearing into the kitchen. Claire was watching closely, and when he returned to his seat, she had an almost imperceptible smile on her lips. "You defended someone you don't even know," she said. "Do you know how many people would rather stay silent just to avoid standing out?" Nathan scratched the back of his neck, uncomfortable. "I just said what seemed right." She raised her wineglass, toasting silently in his direction. As the evening went on, Nathan felt that every detail was carefully observed by Claire. The way he spoke, the decisions he made, even the pauses between his words. At times, he had the strange sensation of being examined as part of a plan he knew nothing about. "Claire, can I ask you something?" he said at last, trying to sound casual. "Of course. Do you always ask so many, deep questions on a first date?" She gave a faint smile but didn't answer right away. She simply swirled the glass between her fingers, watching the reflection on the crystal. "Let's just say I like to know people beyond the surface," she finally said. "I believe true character shows in the details." Nathan nodded, but inside his unease was growing. At one point, he stood to go to the restroom. On his way back through the side corridor, he slowed his steps upon seeing Claire leaning over her phone, speaking softly. She seemed not to have noticed his approach. "Yes, he seems promising so far," she was saying, her voice firm. "But it's still too early. I want to see how he reacts in bigger situations." Nathan froze in the hallway, his heart racing. Had he heard right? Yes, he seems promising so far. But it's still too early. I want to see how he reacts in bigger situations. When Claire noticed his presence, she quickly ended the call and turned back with a smile as if nothing had happened. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her sweet voice concealing something he couldn't decipher. Nathan forced a smile in return, but inside the question was already burning. What kind of blind date had he really gotten himself into? Although he tried to hide it, something inside kept hammering in his head. This wasn't a casual date. It was a test. And he had no idea what the next trial would be. Have you ever suspected that someone had hidden intentions behind their actions, even while smiling at you? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might open other people's eyes. The restaurant hall seemed to have changed tone when Nathan returned to the table. The piano music still played delicately, the conversations murmured around him, but in his chest everything felt offbeat. That phrase he had overheard echoed like a riddle impossible to ignore. He seems promising so far, but it's still too early. Promising. As if he were a candidate for something. As if this dinner were an exam carefully prepared. Claire noticed his expression but pretended not to. She was serene, delicately cutting her dish with silver cutlery. Her smile seemed normal, but her eyes held the same mysterious glimmer that had unsettled him from the start. Nathan took a deep breath and tried to compose himself. He decided that if there was something hidden, he would only find out by staying. "I was just thinking how this place is different from what I'm used to," he said, trying to break the silence. "Different how?" Claire asked, lifting her gaze. "It's refined. Intimidating, even." He chuckled at himself. "I'm more used to the corner bar, with the smell of grease mixed with cheap coffee." Claire tilted her head, as if savoring his sincerity. "Places say a lot about people," she replied. "But not as much as the choices they make when no one's watching." Nathan frowned. He didn't know if it was casual philosophy or yet another of her riddles. Still, there was something fascinating about her. Behind every phrase there always seemed to be more than what appeared. As their conversation continued, a new movement caught Nathan's attention. The side door of the restaurant opened and a middle-aged man entered. Tall, imposing, his immaculate suit looked as though it had been tailored to perfection. There was authority in every step, and the customers discreetly turned to watch him. He walked toward their table. Nathan's heart raced when he noticed Claire's smile as she stood to greet him. "Father," she said, extending her hand naturally. Nathan felt the ground disappear for an instant. The man now taking a seat at the table was her father. That alone would have been intimidating. But there was more, the way he carried an aura of power, as if he were accustomed to being obeyed. "Good evening," the man said, casting a quick glance at Nathan before turning to his daughter. "I didn't expect to find you here so early." "I decided to change my routine," Claire replied. "This is Nathan Reed." The father's gaze rested on him again, this time longer. It was like a silent, cold evaluation, capable of weighing an entire life in a few seconds. Nathan Reed. The name was repeated as if being tested in his mouth. "And what do you do, Nathan?" Nathan straightened his shoulders. He felt exposed under that stare, but decided not to disguise who he was. "I'm a mechanic. I've had a garage for a few years." The man arched his eyebrows, and a polite smile appeared, though it never reached his eyes. "Interesting." The words sounded empty, like a verdict. Claire, sensing the tone, interjected. "He also owns his own business." "Ah, of course." The man raised his wineglass. "Owner of a garage. How admirable." The irony was subtle, but it was there. Nathan felt his stomach twist. Dinner went on, but the atmosphere had changed. Claire's father, who introduced himself as Robert, steered the conversation as if it were an elegant interrogation. "And do you believe a whole life can be sustained merely by repairing automobiles, Mr. Reed?" he asked at one point. "Sustained and honored," Nathan replied, keeping calm. "I don't get rich, but I maintain my independence. And that's enough for me." Robert leaned back slightly, studying him. "Independence is relative." His eyes gleamed. "How much of it is true independence, and how much is limitation disguised as virtue?" Nathan felt the provocation, but restrained his anger. Before he could respond, Claire intervened with a firm smile. "Father, don't be cruel." "I'm not cruel, daughter. I'm realistic." Robert turned back to Nathan. "You see, I don't question the value of manual labor. But I believe men must aim higher. The world demands ambition. Do you have it?" The silence at the table was dense. Nathan could have avoided the question, but instead he spoke with simplicity. "My ambition is to live honestly, care for the people I love, and sleep peacefully every night." Robert chuckled softly, almost imperceptibly. How poetic. Nathan could feel the weight of the invisible battle being waged there. This wasn't just dinner. It was a duel between the power of a man used to commanding and the firmness of someone who had nothing but his integrity to offer. Throughout the exchange, Claire watched in silence. Sometimes she smiled discreetly, sometimes she looked away to hide what she was thinking. But Nathan noticed, she was evaluating, testing, as always. And inside him grew an ever deeper doubt. What was this family's true game? Was it just a blind date? Or was there something much bigger going on, something he still didn't understand? When Robert stepped away for a few minutes to take a call, Claire leaned toward Nathan. "I'm sorry about him. He's intense." "Intense?" Nathan gave a humorless laugh. "He sees me as someone beneath him." Claire sighed. "He sees almost everyone that way. I grew up watching it. He believes the world is made of winners and losers, and only the winners deserve respect." "And in which category does he put you?" Nathan asked. She stayed silent for a few seconds, her eyes reflecting a contained melancholy. Maybe in the category of someone who needs to be protected, even when I never asked for it. Nathan felt a pang of empathy. Her father placed her in a glass dome, judging everything around, including him. But there was something about Claire that didn't match fragility. She carried a silent strength he couldn't ignore. Robert returned, phone still in hand, and cast another assessing look at Nathan. But before he could resume the interrogation, Claire surprised them both. "Father, I was thinking, why don't we invite Nathan to our family dinner on Sunday?" Nathan nearly dropped his fork. He barely knew her, and now he was being invited into the Lawrence family's inner circle? Robert narrowed his eyes, clearly displeased. But after a few seconds, he forced an educated smile. "Of course, dear. If that's what you wish." Then he turned to Nathan. "It will be interesting to see if your philosophy of life holds up outside this table." Nathan felt the weight of the provocation. The test was far from over. Dinner had already stretched on when Robert, always imposing, received another call. He rose from the table, excusing himself with urgent business, and left the hall with heavy steps. The silence that remained between Nathan and Claire was different. Without her father's dominating presence, the atmosphere seemed to change color. The piano still played softly in the background, the waiters moved with trained precision, but now nothing else stood between them. Nathan leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and for the first time that night let his gaze meet hers directly, without caution. "Funny, Claire." His voice was calm, but firm. "You've asked me so many questions, about my choices, my values, my decisions. But so far, I barely know who you are." Claire blinked, surprised by the change in tone. She was used to steering conversations, setting the rhythm, and suddenly she found herself in the opposite role. I've told you some things," she tried to reply. "I just don't think a first date needs to be an interrogation about my life." Nathan gave a soft laugh, but without humor. "Interrogation? Well, that's exactly how I've felt all night." Her eyes widened, as if struck by an invisible blow. "I didn't want it to seem," she began, but Nathan raised his hand, cutting her off gently. "Look, Claire, I'll be honest. I never believed in blind dates. My friend practically forced me into this. She said it would be good for me, that I needed to open myself up to new experiences." He took a deep breath. "I came here with no expectations. Deep down, I just wanted to meet someone special, someone who wouldn't look down on me for being a mechanic who spends the day with grease on his hands." Those words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Claire clasped her hands on the table. Her face, until then so steady, revealed its first crack. "Nathan, I didn't mean to put you in that position. But you did." His voice carried no anger, only restrained frustration. "All night long, I felt judged. As if every gesture of mine was a test. As if I were being measured to see if I'm enough for something." Claire's eyes shimmered, not with arrogance, but with vulnerability. For the first time, she seemed disarmed. "Maybe I was wrong," she admitted softly. "I'm tired, Nathan. Tired of people who only come close because of my last name, the money, the doors that can be opened. You have no idea how suffocating that is. I just wanted someone different, someone who could show me there's still authenticity in this world." Nathan leaned forward on the table, elbows resting on the linen. His expression was serious, but not harsh. "Well, if authenticity is what you wanted, you got it." He took a deep breath. "Because I don't know how to lie. The truth is I don't want to be part of a game, of a test. I don't want to feel like an experiment to satisfy your curiosity. I came here expecting a date, not an interview." Claire froze, her lips parted as if searching for words that wouldn't come. Around them, laughter and conversations continued, but at that table time seemed suspended. Nathan straightened in his chair, running a hand through his hair with a nervous gesture. I think that's enough for tonight. He forced a smile, without joy. I don't hold a grudge, but I've learned my lesson. Blind dates aren't for me. Never again. He started pulling out his wallet to pay his share, determined to end the night cleanly. But before he could stand, he felt a firm touch on his hand. She looked at him with intensity, and for the first time that night there was no mystery, only urgency. Nathan, wait. Her voice had changed. It was softer, more human. I know I ruined everything. That I was proud, maybe even unfair with you. But I don't want you to leave thinking I don't care. Nathan stayed silent. You've been the most sincere person I've met in a long time, she continued. And maybe that's exactly why I tried to test you, because I was afraid to believe. But now I realize I don't need proof. I just need someone who talks to me like this, for real. Nathan searched her eyes for any sign of performance, of manipulation. But all he found was genuine vulnerability. She smiled, shyly, as if it were the first time that night her smile carried no defenses. So, can I ask for a second chance, she whispered almost timidly. A real date. Not here, not with tests or games. Just you and me. Nathan sighed, hesitant. And where would that be, he asked cautiously. Claire's smile widened, playful. You choose. He thought for a few seconds, then replied simply. At the bar down the street from my garage. It's simple, it's noisy, but it's where I feel at home. Claire laughed, surprised, the light sound breaking the tension that still hovered over the table. The bar down the street, she repeated, as if it were an unlikely destination for a billionaire's daughter. You know I've never been to a place like that? Then it'll be the first time, Nathan said, and for the first time that night, he also smiled. They looked at each other in silence for a few seconds. And in that moment, there was no luxury, no tests, no titles. Just two people who, against all odds, had found a spark of truth in the middle of chance. The following evening came with a simplicity that contrasted with all the sparkle of the night before. There were no crystal chandeliers, no tables covered in linen cloths. The bar down the street sat on a narrow road, with old signs and the constant smell of strong coffee mixed with frying oil. The chairs were worn, the pictures on the wall faded, but the place had something no luxury restaurant could reproduce: warmth. Nathan had grown up in a working-class neighborhood, where weekends were marked by backyard barbecues, laughter with neighbors, and improvised basketball games on a hoop nailed to the garage. It was in that simple environment that he had learned the value of friendship, community, and honesty. The garage he ran wasn't big, but it was enough to sustain the life he had chosen. Loyal customers came not only for repairs, but also for the trust they had in him. Fixing a car had never been just a job for Nathan, it was about restoring safety, solving real problems, and there was a quiet satisfaction in seeing an engine come back to life after hours of dedication. His routine might have seemed ordinary in the eyes of many, but it was filled with the small connections that gave meaning to existence. A neighbor asking for help to change the oil, a friend dropping by to share a beer in the late afternoon, his mother calling just to check if he was eating properly. Nathan didn't have luxury, but he had solid roots, and that was what kept him whole in a world that so often seemed to spin too fast. Nathan was already seated when Claire walked in. She drew attention without trying, not because of a dress or her last name, but because she seemed out of place in that environment and, at the same time, oddly willing to belong to it. She wore dark jeans, a simple blouse, and her hair was tied back in an almost careless way. When Nathan saw her cross the room, he couldn't help but smile. It was the same woman, but she looked different, less guarded, more real. I thought you wouldn't come, he said when she approached. I thought you'd give up, she replied with a smile. I figured you'd conclude that billionaire heiresses are too much trouble. I almost did, Nathan admitted, amused. But I decided to take the risk one more time. They laughed, and the tension of the previous night began to dissipate like smoke carried by the wind. The waiter brought 2 mugs of cold beer, served without ceremony. Claire picked hers up with both hands, as if that simple gesture were a brand new experience. "I've never had beer in a thick glass mug," she remarked, watching the bubbles rise. "Always in fine glasses, at receptions. This feels different." "Is different good?" Nathan asked. She looked at him thoughtfully, then smiled. "It's freeing." They talked for hours, without hurry. Claire listened to stories from the garage, the old cars Nathan restored, the loyal customers who trusted him more than dealerships, the long nights he spent covered in grease trying to make an engine breathe again. She, in turn, spoke of her life behind the high walls of mansions and formal dinners. She told him about the emptiness of being surrounded by people who smiled only to please, the frustration of not knowing whom to trust. "I grew up surrounded by luxury, but I felt lonely so many times," she confessed. "Sometimes I think people talked more to the name Lawrence than to me." Nathan listened in silence, his eyes attentive. Then he answered simply. "Maybe that's why you wanted this blind date. So that someone would look at you, not at your last name." She nodded, moved by being understood without embellishment. In the middle of the night, a group of customers began laughing loudly at a nearby table, sharing noisy work stories. Claire looked around, surprised. "No one's staring at me." Her voice carried a tone of disbelief. "I expected whispers, curious looks. But here, no one seems to care." "Because here you're just Claire," Nathan said with a smile. "Not the daughter of a billionaire." She let out a soft laugh, almost one of relief. It was as if she had released air that had been trapped in her lungs for years. "So this is what it feels like to be normal," she said jokingly. "It's good." The hours stretched on, and it was past midnight when Claire leaned her elbow on the table and studied him. "Nathan, yesterday I was wrong. I turned our date into a test because I was scared. I wanted so badly to believe that authentic people still exist, that I ended up trying to put you through a trial. But today, here, I realize I don't need answers. I just need someone who talks to me without a mask." Nathan took a deep breath. He still felt the sting of the previous night's frustration, but now there was something different. In front of him he saw not the heiress, not the woman who had judged him, but someone vulnerable, trying to step out of her own bubble.